Well, I'm delighted to be here this morning. We had some very interesting sessions yesterday pointing out technicalities about AI, pointing out how that's being used in business, a lot of details, a lot of facts. And then in this panel this morning, it's been a sort of quieter, more consideration of the effects that AI might have on the economy and on society. And my own preference is I like this degree of thoughtfulness, and I have learned a lot from the four speakers that just talked here. When I started to learn economics, thinking about technology, it was a kind of a strange textbook world that I was brought into. This was at Berkeley, I won't say how many years ago, but not that many. The idea was that there was an economy. The economy stood there in the pages of textbooks, and then every so often at random, new technologies would appear. The economy never seemed to change in structure in that world. The economy just kept going, but it got more productive with these novel technologies coming in. It was kind of like a world of the 1870s where steel was made in steel factories, and then the Bessemer process came along, and that made things much more productive. Then the Thomas process came along, then the open hearth process, etc., one thing after another. But the picture I was given didn't really talk about the economy itself changing in character. The economy was the economy. The economy had technologies. The economy had producers. The economy had consumers, and everything just kept going, and technology kind of floated down in some mysterious way. In fact, once or twice I heard the metaphor that imagine helicopters above the economy dropping blueprints down onto the economy, and novel technologies somehow would be magically generated that way. What I discovered later, and much more realistically from historians and engineers and engineering historians, was that technology, of course, comes in clusters. It comes in groupings, historically. So we might have agricultural technologies, and I'm thinking more of Europe here. We have agricultural technologies all over the place in the 1700s, and then along comes water power and textile machinery, and then the steam engine. That creates a new era or a new different type of economy. In fact, that starts to create an industrial economy with all the machinery, all the enhancements, all the changes in productivity. It lifts people into some degree of well-being. It's quite debatable, and by the 1850s, it produces a lot of horrors that people like Charles Dickens and Marx and Engels documented in great detail. So what I would say is, as these novel clusters of technology come along, heavy engineering, the 1880s, age of mass production, maybe around 1910, 1920, electricity-based technologies, then electronics, and in our own age, digital technologies, the economy keeps changing in character, and it keeps changing what it can do. There's a beautiful book written on this I want to refer to, and that's by Carlota Perez, who I believe will be speaking this afternoon. She wrote a book called Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital, but she was arguing that these clusters of technology, she pointed out every 50 years or so, recreate the economy and character, and that recreates society, and that gives us a different point of view mentally, and the whole world changes. I found this fascinating. I wrote about this in my own book in 2009 called The Nature of Technology. Basically, the argument is it's not just true that the economy creates technology, it certainly does, but the reverse is equally true and even more important. Technology creates the economy of the day. So we have new eras in technology. We've times that are set in character via the technology, and we could recognize this immediately. If I show you a movie made in the 1940s, you'd recognize all the technologies, factories, heavy machinery, cars that were painted black. It sets the entire character of technology, sets the entire character of the economy, of society, and even of the way of thinking. So that leads to the question then, what about our current cluster of technologies? It's very loosely called the digital revolution. That's what I heard a lot about yesterday and quite a bit about this morning. And then there's AI. What strikes me about the digital revolution, to take that as an overall revolution, is that it's not constant. It's not just that we discovered the computer, Wump, and then everything else follows from that. The digital revolution changes. And as far as I can see, it seems to change about every 15 or 20 years. To use a better word in English, the digital revolution morphs, meaning it changes its shape. It changes its character. It's completely different, not totally different, but quite different in the way it operates about every 15, 20 years. So in the 1960s and 70s, we had mainframe computing that crunched numbers, that produced an awful lot of accounting and arithmetic, kept government statistics, a number processing, digital revolution. That morphed and changed into, given the arrival of fiber optics and the arrival of satellite transmission, then suddenly it was possible for all these computers and number crunching machines to be in contact with each other. And from there arose the web and the internet in general. And from there, the economy followed with globalization. You could be in touch instantaneously with your supply chain. The supply chain could be anywhere in the world, including China, including Mexico, including Europe, including America. And so that revolutionized the economy. Then we moved on, but again, 15, 20 years later, to an economy that had become based on the internet, and we got web services, and we got the cloud, and that led again to another version of the digital economy. And then starting in about 2010 on into 2020 and further, we got the first batch of serious AI, which was deep learning, and that's been much talked about yesterday. And we also have, in the last, I'd say 5 years or more, we've had generative AI. And I want to mention these particular two things. By the way, one lesson I'd learned from this digital economy changing and morphing and never staying the same is that it's not predictable. One of the previous speakers talked about uncertainty. it's not just that you don't know what version of the digital revolution will happen next. It's not really knowable, as far as I can see, until it arrives. So I find the digital revolution is a bit like a dream. Something's happening, feels very real. I don't mean a dream in the sense of being wonderful. I mean a dream in the sense that you're asleep. You're in this world, the world sort of makes sense, and then you're wondering how that world works, and suddenly it morphs or changes into a different world. And then that seems very real to you, and then suddenly you're in a different world again, and maybe at that stage you wake up or something. I'm not saying this is a nightmare, I'm just saying that you can't pin down the digital economy, and we don't know what's happening next. Let me talk about what has been happening in the sense of AI, and maybe make a few connections with what's been said before. What fascinates me about AI is not all the wonderful things you can do. That's quite amazing. It's not quite how that works. I'm trained as an engineer mostly and a mathematician, so I find I can indeed think about the technicalities of AI. But what interests me is the type of intelligence that AI has brought us. And I want to point out to two types of intelligence that have arisen so far. This is not news to you, but it's a way to look at AI. We've had, in the period of deep learning, which came up probably from about the year 2005 to up until now, let's say 2005 to 2015 or 2020, what we learned to do in terms of intelligence with AI was to associate things. So I show pixels of my face to some camera in the airport. It associates those pixels with some name. Oh, that's Arthur. And it recognizes the name. If I speak some sentence in English, it can automatically associate that with an appropriate and reasonably accurate rendition in Mandarin. So what we did in that phase of AI was we learned how to associate something with something else. We learned to associate some picture maybe, and then say that's a picture of a Siamese cat. And we learned that extremely well. The interesting thing about that is that that took us by surprise. I live in Silicon Valley, I work in Silicon Valley, I talk to people there, and I wouldn't say we were flabbergasted, but we were all surprised. It was thought that machines could only do machine-like things. They could do arithmetic, they could do logic, and then we discovered that what we're good at as human beings is associating. We think of this idea, we might think of cornflakes in the morning, and we associate that maybe vaguely with our childhood or something. We're good at associating, and suddenly machines could be good at associating. And I think I wouldn't say we were stunned, but we were surprised. And I'm sure the same surprise happened here. The next form of AI, or the latest form, people have been calling it generative AI, and I think generative is the right word. Transformer models, large language models, foundational models, etc. This type of AI does something somewhat different from associating faces with names or names with faces. What it does is it puts together things. It takes collections of things, it could take sentences or phrases on the internet, and then put these together in some sensible way. So this form of intelligence isn't just associating, it's constructing, it's building stuff. And again, that's something we thought only humans could do. We now have an AI system that creates. And I want to point out two things. It's very hard to say anything new about this because so much interesting has been said before about this here at this conference. But I want to point to two things. One is that I think we're going to move shortly into using generative AI, not just to put text together or ideas together, or even design ideas together, but to put actions together. I'm imagining a generative AI that could build a skyscraper. And I don't mean design one, I mean build one. So all the actions happen. So the design happens, that's done by generative AI. The planning happens, the planning permissions are sought by generative AI. The materials are sought, the cranes and so on are all brought into the construction. And the construction, the cement is poured, the concrete is mixed, all to the proper. These are all actions. So what we're moving into, I think one thing I'm expecting, and this isn't a very deep insight at all, is that we're not just going to get designs or text or music composed and put together. What we're about to get is actions put together. And I think that's going to bring another dimension and depth to AI. When you get generative AI, one other thing that generative AI can do is, if generative AI can construct, then I wouldn't say trivially, but alarmingly, it can construct itself. It's beginning to construct code. And we had an absolutely beautiful talk this morning by Marshall van Alstein, if I can pronounce that right. And pointing out the dangers of this. So think of generative AI not as just generating reports or generating designs or building buildings, but generative AI as generating generative AI. And again, that, as you heard this morning, and also from several speakers, I find that both alarming and quite amazing. One thing I want to point out is that I'm expecting there to be a third type of intelligence, a slightly different kind. I would call it social intelligence, and that would be where individual elements in the economy or in the world are starting to be in conversation digitally with each other. So think of cars going down a freeway in Los Angeles. Those cars, they're driverless in 10 years' time, are here. And they will all be in conversation with each other with no human beings involved. Probably there won't be a central processor. Likely this will be an autonomous conversation between autonomous agents all speaking to each other. And from that will arise appropriate behavior, or if you like, intelligent behavior. So convoys or fleets of cars will form. Similarly, for aircraft landing, there need not be traffic controllers, there need not be a central algorithm. Such things will be what in complexity you would call self-organizing systems that will automatically configure, reconfigure, and have their own internal logic. And again, I think this is a slightly different type of intelligence. It's not quite with us, it's coming, and I would call that social intelligence. I want to finish here with 3 observations or remarks They're a little bit at random. One is that I'm very often asked, in fact, all of us, I'm sure, in the room are often asked, what is the importance of this AI revolution, or the digital revolution, and particularly this artificial intelligence version of it? I'm old enough, by the way, I have to tell you, I remember a friend of mine taking me to the computer science department at Stanford. I had just arrived there. I was a lot younger. And he said, I want you to meet someone. And I went into the computer science department. Then I went into a long hallway. The hallway was very dark. At the end of this hallway, there was a room, and in the room there was a green glow from a computer. This is when computers were green, had green. And there was a sort of gnome-like figure hunched over the computer. And my friend said, I'd like you to meet John McCarthy. He's the person who invented the whole idea, or at least the label artificial intelligence. Stuck in my mind, and I've never forgotten that particular moment. So I want to ask, just how important is this part of the digital revolution, the coming of AI in particular? I would say it's the most important revolution we've had so far. Why? I compare it with the print revolution, happened in Europe around 1450s to about 1550, and printing was invented here in China about 600 years before. It proved much more difficult to implement in China with thousands of characters than it did with a simple alphabet like we had in Europe. So it did take off in Europe. Paper was invented here too, and that managed to, paper and printing made a huge difference. What really happened with printing was not just that we could print, and then you got books, and then once you had books, you could sell books, and the GDP rose a certain fraction. That's not it. The truly important thing was that people, smart people, not so smart people, but literate people, had access to information privately, books, for the first time. Now with AI, we have public access to intelligence, for better or worse, publicly, for the first time. And we heard a lot this morning about AI agents, and we heard a lot, in fact, really interesting things got said about AI agents and about how this would change our lives. So I'm not saying quite yet that this is wonderful. It's amazing, but I do find it a little bit, I'm sort of going, well, I'm not quite sure what to make of it. What I am sure of is this is the most important set or cluster of technologies that we have created yet as human beings. It's getting created largely in two countries. One is the US, and the other equally is here. And it's not saying one is following the other. China's a leader in this area, and as a leader, it needs to think and is thinking about the consequences. Second observation I have is that it came up several times in these talks in the panel here, that we need to be a bit careful what we're doing. We need to think about what we're doing. In fact, that was an overall theme that I heard this morning, that we shouldn't just blunder ahead, and every talk, all of the 4 talks that preceded this one, have been talks about what we should do, how we should think of this, should we regulate this or not. What surprises me is that there's been so little regulation, there's been some, of artificial intelligence. But I wouldn't say it's totally absent, but it's kind of wafting around. From a historical point of view, it's not quite surprising. Any new cluster of technologies, I think, goes through what I would call a cowboy stage. It's a word that might be hard to translate, meaning a wild, unregulated stage where anything goes. Dodge City in 1881, it's wild. No regulation, no law west of the Pecos River kind of situation. Or maybe to put this in better perspective, it's like 7-year-olds are having a party and the adults haven't arrived. Adult supervision hasn't quite arrived in AI just yet. My forecast is that it will arrive. And why do I say that? I was thinking about this in the last few days. I think supervision or regulation or much more care is going to arrive in AI simply because it has arrived in every other field that we have. You get on an aircraft, that aircraft has to stay in the air, it has to be properly designed, properly maintained, properly manufactured, etc. That's carefully regulated. Nuclear energy is carefully regulated. New pharmaceuticals are carefully regulated. Gene editing is carefully regulated, etc. You could agricultural equipment, agricultural fertilizers, agricultural production, water management, pollution management, all of these are carefully regulated. And I think it's likely that there will be careful regulation eventually of AI. Whether it comes in time or not, I don't know. And I was somewhat alarmed to hear several people saying, and I must say I agree with them, I thought the talks this morning were excellent, but several people said, we can see the dangers, but what should we do about them? We're not sure. I think the most important issue with AI is not where AI is going. The most important issue with AI is, as human beings, how are we going to accommodate ourselves with the coming of AI, and what will be our relation to the development of AI, the future path of AI, and the future path of human beings. This is as true in this part of the world as it is in Europe or as it is in America. These are problems we all have to face and all have to work out. One last comment. We had one or two people saying here that there's more to being human than just having AI and having comfort. I must say I totally agree. I'm now at an age where I can look back on my life, and every so often, if I've nothing better to do, I might find myself drinking beer or something, sitting around and thinking, in the life I've had so far, what has been memorable, what has been satisfying? And one thing I can tell you, I'm not that old, but I can tell you, it isn't comfort that's been most satisfying. I used to own a surfboard in Hawaii and do a lot of surfing. I did a lot of skiing, believe it or not. I've had children, etc. All of that is immensely satisfying, but the deepest satisfaction in my life, and I'll bet you this is true for everybody sitting here, is not the pleasures or the comfort you've had, it's the challenges that you feel you've overcome. And I can tell you, I've almost died once or twice, skiing accidents and so on. And I remember sitting in an ICU unit, an emergency unit, in a hospital at 2 in the morning, wondering whether I should live or not. And I think that, yeah, I mean, that's easy to settle if you have children, so I'm still around. But I want to point out that what makes us human more than anything is not the comfort we achieve, that's important, but the challenges that we deal with. And this is true everywhere. And we are in a particularly challenging time, at least where I'm coming from, and I'm waiting to see how we might respond to that. Thank you very much.